Segment 5, theory. Lots of questioners want to know whether you share Congressman Ron Paul's skepticism of the Fed. And I'm going to quote you. This isn't in Basic Economics, but a recent column. Quote, "For most of the history of this country, there was no Federal Reserve System." There you go, that dirty trick of bringing in history.
Ah, yes.
There was no Federal Reserve System, which was established in 1914 to prevent bank failures. But bank failures in the 1930s exceeded anything ever seen before the Fed was established. Close quote. If you could, if we could make you dictator, would you abolish the Fed?
Yes.
You would.
Yes, I mean, for the reasons I just gave, the history. There's no, the Fed represented wonderful hopes, but we've had so many programs that represented wonderful hopes that ended in disaster. I don't doubt that someone who is sufficiently scholarly could come up with examples of where the Federal Reserve made things better. But the question is, overall, what was it supposed to do? It was supposed to do not only prevent bank failures, it was supposed to prevent huge changes in the money supply, in particular, great deflations.
Right.
The greatest deflation in American history occurred under the Federal Reserve System. There was a crisis in 1907. J.P. Morgan, the original J.P. Morgan, called the other bankers into a room, supposedly locked the doors, and said, "We've got to do something or we're going to all collapse." And they did something, and they didn't all collapse. But the progressives were shocked that one man could come in and take command of the situation, and especially someone who wasn't even in the government.
Right. So what would you do? You'd move us back to the gold standard, or you'd let banks issue their own currencies the way they did up through the Civil War? Say I could.
Well, they weren't doing any of those things as of the time the Federal Reserve was created. We were on the gold standard, though. But whether we're on or off the gold standard, that's another whole set of arguments. There's no evidence that I can see that over this vast period of time that the Federal Reserve has existed, that things on the whole have been better. The great post-World War II inflation was fed by the Federal Reserve doing exactly what they're planning to do now, namely buying up the bonds issued by the Treasury.
But don't you have, I have to say, I wasn't expecting your answer to run in this direction, so I don't have follow-up questions prepared, or I may actually have to think here in real time. But don't we have the example of that period from 83 through a couple of years ago, that 25 years of economic expansion? We had only two downturns. They were both very shallow and very brief. And what you had was Paul Volcker, whom Carter appointed, but Reagan gave the freedom actually to wring inflation out of the currency. He did that by the mid-'80s. The economy takes off. Alan Greenspan does a reasonably good job, and then at the end, there's too much money but maybe 5 years of getting it wrong. So
what Volcker did was undo the harm that previous Federal Reserves had done,
including Arthur Burns.
Yeah, unfortunately, who was my teacher and one whom I much admired.
Right. Right. So, but what would you replace it with? How would the currency? How would the currency run?
We would replace it. We could replace it with what existed when it was created,
which was the gold standard.
Well, it may be the gold standard, but maybe not. But there's no evidence that what would you replace it? Things always bother me.
They do?
When someone removes the cancer, what do you replace it with?
Okay. All right. Closing few questions here that didn't really seem to fit in, but they struck me as good questions. From JJM Director on Twitter, some claim the bailouts worked. We have the banks recovering now.
You mean banks have never recovered before?
All right. Thank you very much. Lots of questions on Keynesianism. Michael Labite of Ricochet. What explains the allure of Keynesian economics? Excuse me. We've already said that this effort to stimulate the economy, Obama's first 2 years, that was essentially Keynesianism. So just to tie that in to what we've discussed earlier. What explains the allure of Keynesian economics despite its lackluster empirical record? Or here we have a fellow called Jack Rea of our Facebook page. Does the Keynesian school have any credibility left? Close quote.
Well, there are ideas of Keynes that still exist. Milton Friedman said as much. As he said, in a sense, we're all Keynesians now, and in another sense, nobody's a Keynesian, meaning that no one buys the whole Keynesian package anymore. But there are particular insights and ways of analyzing that came out of Keynes that people of different schools of thought will use when they feel like it.
So Keynes provided us with technical with tools,
Yes.
rather than a prescription.
He provided us with both. It's just that the prescriptions haven't turned out as well as the tools.
All right. I began the program by asking, why does the United States have the highest GDP per capita of any major country? And what I'd like to ask, final question, basic economics. You've said that some of the debates taking place today are frustrating to you because they took place in the 20s and the 30s, and you just feel as though the country isn't making progress. Is there within basic economics, has the discipline made enough progress? And will the political realm respond to progress in the discipline enough that, and here I come finally to the final question, you feel confident that 25 years from now and 30 years from now, the United States will still have the highest per capita GDP of any major country?
I think the answer to those questions would be yes, no, and no. With an addition that, fortunately, I'm at the age where I don't worry about what's going to happen in 25 years.
Well, okay, but you have children.
Well, yeah,
So are you generally?
that gives me the.
Are you optimistic about
No.
it? You're not.
The problem is not that the profession hasn't reached a level that of understanding. I think if the average citizen understood economics as well as it was understood by economists 200 years ago, most of the nonsense that's done in Washington would be impossible politically. Economists have very little influence in that sense. The people in Washington decide what they want to do, and they find an economist who will go along with it.
But Tom, the Tea Party just arose out of nowhere. We just had a tidal wave in which the Republicans won 61 new seats in the House of Representatives.
Yes.
They have a majority of 49 seats, which is the biggest majority the GOP has had in decades. Nobody supposes it was because they were Republicans.
Right.
It's because of anger at the nonsense. Doesn't that give you some glimmer of hope?
Yes. Because if Obama had retained the power that he had before the election, I think I would have been more than pessimistic. I would have just been despairing.
All right. Dr. Thomas Sowell, the non-despairing Dr. Thomas Sowell, author of the 4th edition of Basic Economics, which I have already bought for my college-age student at home. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Peter Robinson for Uncommon Knowledge and the Hoover Institution. Thanks for joining us.